What happens when a simple game changes everything? How did a kiss meant to spark jealousy end with legal papers on my doorstep, and my whole world collapsing in front of everyone I know? I thought my husband would just get mad. Instead, he turned the tables with the coldest revenge I never saw coming. The wine had been flowing freely that Saturday night, and our living room buzzed with laughter from our monthly game night. I watched my husband Edric from across the coffee table, noting how he barely looked up from his phone, even when our friends were telling their funniest stories. At 35, he'd become predictable, boring even. When was the last time he'd shown any real passion about anything? "All right, truth or dare time," announced my friend Jessica, clapping her hands together. "We haven't played this since college." I felt a familiar flutter of excitement. This was exactly what our stale marriage needed, a little spontaneity, some harmless fun to shake things up. "I'll go first," I volunteered, my eyes scanning the circle. They landed on Theo, who'd been making me laugh all evening with his stories from the gym where he worked as a trainer. He had this way of really listening when I talked, unlike my husband, who seemed to tune me out these days. "Dare," I said boldly, ignoring the slight frown that crossed Edric's face. Jessica grinned mischievously. "I dare you to kiss the most attractive person in this room who isn't your husband." My heart raced. This was perfect. Maybe seeing another man want me would remind Edric what he had. Maybe it would spark some of that jealousy that used to make him pull me close and whisper that he'd never let anyone else have me. Without hesitation, I stood up and walked over to where Theo sat on our leather armchair. His dark eyes met mine, and I could see the surprise mixed with something else. Interest, maybe even desire. "Sorry, Edric," I called over my shoulder with a laugh that sounded more confident than I felt. "Just following the rules of the game." I leaned down and pressed my lips to Theo's. What was supposed to be a quick peck lingered longer than it should have. His hand came up to rest lightly on my waist, and for a moment, I forgot we had an audience. When we finally broke apart, I could feel the electricity between us. The room had gone quiet. I turned to look at my husband, expecting to see anger, jealousy, some kind of reaction that would prove he still cared enough to fight for me. Instead, Edric's expression was unreadable. He set down his phone and gave me what I would later recognize as the coldest smile I'd ever seen. "Interesting choice, Corey," he said quietly, his voice so level it sent a chill down my spine. "Oh, come on," I said, forcing another laugh as I returned to my seat. "It was just a game. Don't be such a stick in the mud." But something in his eyes had changed. Where I'd expected fire, there was ice. Where I'd hoped for passion, there was calculation. The game continued, but the energy had shifted. Our friend seemed uncomfortable, and Edric participated with a politeness that felt more dangerous than anger would have been. Later, after everyone had gone home and we were cleaning up, I tried to gauge his mood. "You're not actually upset about that silly dare, are you?" I asked, loading glasses into the dishwasher. "Why would I be upset?" he replied, wiping down the counter with methodical precision. "Like you said, it was just a game." But I caught him watching me in a way he never had before, not with love or desire, but like he was studying me, taking notes. It should have been a warning, but I was too caught up in the memory of Theo's lips on mine and the way he'd looked at me like I was the most fascinating woman in the world. That night, as Edric and I lay in bed with our backs to each other, I made a decision that would destroy everything. If my husband wouldn't give me the attention and excitement I craved, maybe it was time to find someone who would. I had no idea that Edric had made a decision of his own. The gym membership I'd been talking about for months suddenly became a priority. I signed up the very next Monday, telling Edric it was time I took better care of myself. He nodded absently, buried in grading papers as usual. "That's great, honey," he said without looking up. "You should do whatever makes you happy." If only I'd heard the careful neutrality in his tone, the way he'd started measuring his words around me. Theo was working the evening shift, and I'd timed my arrival perfectly. He looked surprised but pleased to see me. "Well, well, Didn't expect to see you here so soon, he said, that easy smile spreading across his face. Ready to get started on those fitness goals? Actually, I was hoping you could show me around personally, I said, letting my voice carry just a hint of flirtation. I'm completely lost in here. What started as fitness consultations quickly became something more. Theo had a way of making me feel seen, appreciated. When I complained about Edric's lack of attention, he listened with genuine sympathy. A woman like you deserves to feel special every day, he told me during our third session, his hand lingering on my lower back as he corrected my form. Some guys just don't know what they have. I began staying later at the gym, then grabbing dinner afterward. When Edric asked about my extended absences, I had my explanations ready. The evening classes run long, I'd tell him, and then sometimes a group of us grab a healthy dinner to discuss nutrition. It's all part of the program. He'd nod and return to his papers or his laptop, seemingly satisfied. But I started noticing small changes. He'd begun keeping a notebook on his desk, writing in it when he thought I wasn't looking. When I tried to peek at it once, I found his study door locked for the first time in our 10-year marriage. "Why is your office locked?" I asked him directly. "Just keeping some sensitive student information secure," he replied smoothly. "New district policies about privacy." It sounded reasonable, but something nagged at me. Edric had never been secretive before. Meanwhile, my relationship with Theo was intensifying. We'd graduated from training sessions to long conversations over protein shakes, then to dinners at quiet restaurants across town where we were unlikely to run into anyone we knew. "I feel like I can tell you anything," I confided in him one evening as we shared dessert at a cozy bistro. "Edric and I barely talk anymore. He's so wrapped up in his work, his students, his boring routine." "You're too vibrant for that kind of life," Theo said, reaching across the table to cover my hand with his. "You need someone who appreciates your spirit." The first time he kissed me, really kissed me, not as part of some party game, was in the parking lot after dinner. I knew I was crossing a line, but the thrill of being wanted, being pursued, was intoxicating. "I should go," I whispered against his lips, but I made no move to leave his embrace. "Should and want are two different things," he murmured back. He was right. I didn't want to go home to my distracted husband and our silent house. I wanted to stay here in this bubble where I felt alive and desired. When I finally got home that night, nearly 2 hours later than usual, Edric was in the kitchen making tea. "How was the gym?" he asked conversationally. "Great," I said, probably too quickly. "Really great. I'm making so much progress." "I can see that," he said, and something in his tone made me look at him sharply, but his expression was mild, almost pleasant. "You seem energized lately." "Exercise will do that," I replied, heading toward the stairs. "I'm going to shower." "Corey," he called after me. "Yeah?" "That restaurant you went to tonight, the Olive Branch, how was the food?" I froze halfway up the stairs. I'd never mentioned going to a restaurant, and I'd certainly never told him which one. What?" "You have their logo on your takeout napkin," he said calmly, nodding toward where I'd apparently dropped it by the front door. "Just curious if it's worth trying." My heart hammered as I forced a casual laugh. "Oh, that. Yeah, a few of us grabbed a quick bite after class. The food was okay, nothing special." "Good to know," he said, taking a sip of his tea. "Sleep well, honey." As I stood under the hot spray of the shower, I told myself I was being paranoid. So what if he'd noticed a napkin? It didn't mean anything. I'd been honest about going out to eat, just not completely honest about who I'd been with. But when I came back downstairs for a glass of water an hour later, I saw Edric at the kitchen table with that notebook again, writing by the light of a single lamp. He looked up when I entered, closing the notebook casually. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. "Just thirsty," I said, filling a glass at the sink. "What are you working on so late?" "Just some lesson planning," he said. "You know how it is." But as I headed back upstairs, I could have sworn I heard him opening the notebook again, the soft scratch of pen on paper following me into the darkness. 3 weeks later, I was practically living a double life. My evenings belonged to Theo and the intoxicating world he'd introduced me to, a world where I was fascinating and desired, where my opinions mattered and my laughter was genuine. "You should meet my friends," Theo suggested one Thursday evening as we finished dinner at the Bistro, a trendy cafe that had become our regular spot. "Marcus and Sarah are having drinks here later. They'd love you." I hesitated. Meeting his friends felt like another line to cross, another step away from my marriage and toward what exactly? I wasn't ready to answer that question. "I don't know," I said. "What if someone sees us? So what if they do?" Theo leaned back in his chair, studying me with those dark eyes that had become so familiar. "You're allowed to have friends, Corey. You're allowed to have a life outside of that house where you feel invisible." He was right, of course. I was just having dinner with friends. There was nothing wrong with that. Marcus and Sarah turned out to be exactly the kind of people I'd been missing in my life. Spontaneous, fun, full of stories about adventures and travels. They made me feel sophisticated and interesting, asking about my work and actually listening to my answers. "Theo told us you're married to a teacher," Sarah said, twirling her wine glass. "That must be stable." The way she said stable made it sound like a disease. "Very stable," I agreed with a laugh. "Sometimes too stable, if you know what I mean." "Oh, honey," Marcus chimed in, "stable is code for boring. Trust me, I was married to stable once. Nearly died of boredom before I escaped." We were all laughing at his exaggerated shudder when I saw a familiar figure approaching our table. My blood turned to ice water. Edric stood beside our table, in his typical casual Friday outfit, khakis and a button-down shirt that suddenly looked painfully ordinary, next to Theo's fitted black t-shirt and designer jeans. "Hi, Corey," he said calmly. "Fancy meeting you here." The table fell silent. I could feel my face burning as I scrambled for an explanation. "Edric, what a surprise, we were just having dinner with friends," Theo interjected smoothly, rising to his feet. He was several inches taller than my husband and clearly knew it. "I'm Theo. You must be the husband." The way he said the husband made it sound like a minor inconvenience. "I am," Edric replied, not offering his hand. "And you're the personal trainer who's been keeping my wife out so late." "Among other things," Theo said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "Corey's told me a lot about you." I wanted to disappear into the floor. This was not how I'd imagined these two worlds colliding. "All good things, I hope," Edric said, but his attention was on me now. "Though she seems to have forgotten to mention these dinner dates." "They're not dates," I said quickly, hating how defensive I sounded. "We're just friends, all of us. It's not a big deal." "Of course not," Edric agreed. "Just like the game the other night wasn't a big deal." Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances. Theo's jaw tightened. "Look, man," Theo said, his voice taking on an edge. "Maybe if you paid more attention to your wife, she wouldn't need to find interesting conversation elsewhere." The words hung in the air like a slap. I saw something flicker in Edric's eyes, not anger, but something colder and more calculating. "You're probably right," he said quietly. "I have been distracted lately. Work projects, you understand. But don't worry, I'm planning to give Corey my full attention very soon." There was something in his tone that made my stomach clench with unease. "Edric, please," I started, but he was already stepping back from the table. "Don't let me interrupt your evening," he said. "Enjoy your friendship." He turned and walked away without another word, leaving me sitting there feeling exposed and humiliated. My new friends were staring at me with a mixture of pity and curiosity. "Wow," Sarah said after a moment. "That was awkward." "He seems like a real prize," Marcus added sarcastically. But Theo was watching the door where Edric had disappeared, his expression thoughtful. "He's not what I expected," he said finally. What do you mean? I asked. I expected him to be angry, jealous. Instead, he seemed... Theo paused, searching for the word. Prepared. I forced a laugh, trying to shake off the chill that had settled over me. Prepared for what? It's not like we're doing anything wrong. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. And from the way Theo was looking at me, I suspected he knew it too. Maybe it's time we were, he said quietly, his hand finding mine across the table. I should have pulled away. Should have recognized the warning signs, the careful way Edric had handled the confrontation, the notebook he'd been writing in, the locked door to his study. Instead, I squeezed Theo's hand and let him pull me deeper into a web I didn't realize was already closing around me. The next morning, Edric acted as if nothing had happened. He made coffee, asked if I wanted eggs, and mentioned that his mother had invited us for Sunday dinner. All of us, he said casually, buttering his toast, including Nora. Our 9-year-old daughter had been staying with her grandmother more often lately, something I'd been grateful for given my complicated schedule. But now the thought of a family dinner felt like a trap. I might be busy Sunday, I said, not meeting his eyes. With what? Just... things. You know how it is. Edric set down his coffee cup and looked at me directly for the first time since the restaurant incident. Actually, I don't know how it is anymore, he said. Why don't you explain it to me? There was something in his voice that made me defensive. I don't have to account for every minute of my time, Edric. I'm an adult. You're also a wife and mother, he replied quietly. Remember? The words stung because they were true, and I hated him for making me feel guilty about finally finding some happiness. Fine, I snapped. I'll be at your mother's dinner, but I'm bringing Theo. Edric went very still. Excuse me? He's my friend, I said, lifting my chin defiantly. If we're having a family dinner, I want my friend there. For a long moment, Edric just stared at me. Then he nodded slowly. Of course, he said. Your friend is welcome. Something about his easy agreement made my stomach twist, but I pushed the feeling aside. Maybe this would be good. Maybe seeing Theo in a family setting would remind Edric that other men found me attractive and interesting. Sunday dinner at Gina Vale's house was a disaster from the moment we walked through the door. Who is this? Edric's mother asked bluntly when I introduced Theo. Corey's personal trainer, Edric answered before I could speak. And friend. The way he emphasized friend made it sound like something dirty. Gina, never one to mince words, looked Theo up and down with obvious disapproval. And why exactly is Corey's personal trainer at our family dinner? Because I invited him, I said firmly. Theo's become very important to me. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Nora, who'd been coloring at the kitchen table, looked up with wide, confused eyes. Mummy, why is everyone being weird? She asked in that innocent way children have of cutting straight to the truth. No one's being weird, sweetheart, I said, shooting a warning look at Gina. We're just meeting Mummy's new friend. Theo, to his credit, tried to charm his way through the tension. He complimented Gina's cooking, asked Nora about her drawings, and made conversation about sports with Tristan, Edric's younger brother, who joined us for dinner. But I could see it wasn't working. Gina remained coldly polite. Tristan kept glancing between Edric and me with worried eyes. And Edric watched everything with that same calculating expression he'd worn at the restaurant. The breaking point came during dessert when Theo made a joke about married life that had Nora giggling. Uncle Theo is funny, she said, and I felt a warm glow of satisfaction. See? Even my daughter liked him better than her own father sometimes. Uncle Theo, Gina repeated, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. It's just what she started calling me, Theo said with an easy shrug. Kids, you know? No, Gina said, standing abruptly. I don't know. Edric, could I speak with you in the kitchen? They disappeared for several long minutes, leaving me, Theo, Tristan, and Nora in increasingly uncomfortable silence. When they returned, Edric's face was expressionless, but Gina looked like she was barely restraining herself from saying something she'd regret. "We should go," I announced, suddenly desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere. "Good idea," Gina said coolly. "Nora, sweetie, why don't you stay here tonight? We can make pancakes in the morning." "Can I, Mummy?" Nora asked, and I found myself nodding even though I wanted to refuse. Something about the way everyone was looking at me made me feel like I was the problem, and I resented it. In the car afterward, Theo was quiet until we were halfway home. "Your family doesn't like me much," he observed. "They don't know you," I said defensively. "They're just protective of Edric." "Are you sure that's all it is?" I glanced at him, noting the serious expression on his face. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe they can see what's happening here better than you can." "What's happening here?" He pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine, then turned to face me fully. "You're falling for me," he said simply. "And I'm falling for you. This isn't just friendship anymore, Corey, and everyone in that house knew it." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Theo, I'm not asking you to make any decisions tonight," he said, reaching over to cup my face gently. "But we both know where this is heading." When he kissed me this time, it was different, deeper, more possessive. When we broke apart, I was breathless and dizzy with want. "I should go inside," I whispered. "Should," he repeated with a small smile. There's that word again. I watched him drive away, then stood in my driveway for a long moment, trying to collect myself. When I finally went inside, I found Edric in his study, the door wide open for once. "How was the rest of dinner?" I asked from the doorway. "Enlightening," he said without looking up from his computer. "Edric, about tonight." "There's nothing to discuss," he interrupted, finally meeting my eyes. "You made your priorities very clear." Something in his tone sent a chill through me. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," he said, turning back to his screen, "that I understand the situation now, completely." I wanted to ask what situation he meant, but something held me back. Instead, I went upstairs to bed alone, trying to ignore the sound of typing that continued late into the night. The next few weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and growing deception. My relationship with Theo had crossed every line I'd once sworn I'd never cross. We'd moved beyond dinners and lingering kisses to afternoon meetings at his apartment, where I'd lose myself in the intoxicating feeling of being completely desired. "You're glowing," my coworker Janet commented one Tuesday afternoon as I returned from what was supposed to be a client meeting. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up." If only she knew. I'd actually spent 2 hours in Theo's bed, making love with a passion I'd forgotten existed. The guilt I'd expected never came. Instead, I felt alive for the first time in years. But maintaining the lies was becoming exhausting. I had to keep track of which stories I'd told to whom, remember which client meetings were real and which were covers for my affair. My work was suffering, and I'd started getting pointed questions from my supervisor about my frequent absences and declining productivity. "Corey, we need to talk," my boss, Richard, said Friday afternoon, closing his office door behind me. "HR has flagged some discrepancies in your timesheet." My blood ran cold. "Discrepancies?" "You've been claiming overtime for evening client meetings, but we have no record of these appointments, and frankly, your regular work output doesn't reflect the extra hours you're supposedly putting in." I scrambled for an explanation. "I've been doing a lot of preliminary research, networking events. You know how it is in this business." "Corey," Richard's voice was gentle but firm, "if you're having personal issues, we can discuss a leave of absence or reduced hours. But I can't have employees falsifying timesheets." The word falsifying hit me like a slap. That's what I'd been doing, wasn't it? Lying, cheating, stealing time from my employer to spend with my lover. "It won't happen again," I said quickly. "I'll be more careful about documenting everything." Richard studied me for a long moment. "See that you are. This is your only warning." I left his office feeling shaky and exposed. How had things gotten so complicated? All I'd wanted was to feel appreciated, to remember what it was like to be desired. Was that so wrong? But when Theo texted me an hour later, asking if I could meet him, I found myself saying yes despite everything. I needed his reassurance, his arms around me, his voice telling me I was worth the risk. "You look stressed," he observed when I arrived at his apartment, noting the tension in my shoulders. "Work stuff," I said, not wanting to get into the details. "Nothing I can't handle." He pulled me close, and for a while I forgot about Richard's warning, about the lies I was living, about the husband I barely spoke to anymore. It wasn't until I got home that evening that reality crashed back down on me. Edric was sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers in front of him. He looked up when I entered, and I saw something in his expression that made my stomach drop. "We need to talk," he said quietly. The papers, I realized with growing horror, were legal documents. Divorce papers, custody petitions, financial statements. "What is this?" I whispered, even though I knew exactly what it was. "It's the end," Edric said simply. "Of our marriage, of the lies, of pretending that what you're doing is acceptable." My legs felt weak. I sank into the chair across from him, staring at the papers that would destroy my life. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything." His voice was calm, controlled, but I could see the pain beneath the surface. "Did you really think I didn't know, Corey? Did you think I was that stupid?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I said automatically, but the words sounded hollow even to me. Edric reached for a manila folder I hadn't noticed before. He opened it and spread the contents across the table like a dealer laying out cards. Photos of me and Theo at various restaurants, printouts of text messages between us, bank statements showing charges at hotels I'd never mentioned, a detailed timeline of my lies and contradictions. 3 months, he said conversationally. "That's how long I've been documenting your affair. 3 months of watching you lie to my face, to our daughter, to everyone who cares about you." I stared at the evidence of my betrayal laid out in black and white, and for the first time, I saw myself as Edric must have seen me. As a cheater, a liar, a woman who'd thrown away her family for a few stolen afternoons with another man. "I can explain," I started, but he held up a hand to stop me. "There's nothing to explain," he said. "It's all here. Every lie, every deception, every time you chose him over us." Tears started flowing down my cheeks. "Edric, please, it doesn't have to end like this. We can work through this." "Work through what exactly?" His voice was getting harder now, the careful control starting to crack. "Work through the fact that you brought your lover to my mother's house, that you let our daughter call him uncle, that you've been stealing from your employer to pay for hotel rooms." The last part hit me like a physical blow. How did he know about the timesheet issues? "Your friend Janet called me," he said, reading my expression. "She was worried about you. Thought maybe there was something going on at home that was affecting your work. She had no idea how right she was." I felt the walls closing in around me. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to sign these papers," he said, sliding the divorce petition across the table. "I want you to move out of this house, and I want you to stay away from our daughter until you can prove you're capable of putting her needs before your own desires." "You can't take Nora from me," I said, panic rising in my throat. "I'm her mother." "You're a woman who's been so busy playing house with another man that you haven't noticed your daughter's grades dropping, her nightmares increasing, her constant questions about why mommy and daddy don't love each other anymore." Each word was a knife to my heart because they were true. I had been so caught up in my affair that I'd neglected the most important person in my life. "I made mistakes," I whispered, "but I love her. I love you." "No," Edric said, standing up and gathering the papers. "You love the idea of being loved. You love the excitement, the drama, the feeling of being desired. But you don't love us enough to fight for us. You proved that the moment you chose him." He headed toward the door, then paused and looked back at me. "You have until Monday to decide whether you want to do this the easy way or the hard way. But either way, it's over, Corey. We're over." After he left, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the evidence of my betrayal and wondering how I'd let things go so far. For the first time in months, I saw my situation clearly, and I didn't like what I saw. But it was too late for regret. The damage was done, and now I had to face the consequences of the choices I'd made. The courthouse was intimidating in a way I hadn't expected. The marble floors echoed with every footstep, and the formal atmosphere made my casual dress feel inadequate. I'd hired a lawyer at the last minute, a tired-looking man named David Phillips, who'd taken my case more out of pity than confidence in winning. "Remember," he'd told me during our brief consultation, "stick to the facts. Don't get emotional. And whatever you do, don't try to justify the affair. Just focus on your love for your daughter and your commitment to being a good mother." Across the courtroom, Edric sat with his attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Chen, who had a reputation for being ruthless in family court. He looked calm, composed, nothing like the broken man I'd expected him to become. When my name was called, I stood on shaky legs and approached the witness stand. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, looked at me with the kind of neutral expression that somehow felt like condemnation. "Mrs. Vale," my lawyer began, "please tell the court about your relationship with your daughter." I took a deep breath, trying to project the confidence I didn't feel. "I love Nora more than anything in the world. She's my whole life. Yes, I made some mistakes in my marriage, but that doesn't make me a bad mother." "And what mistakes are you referring to?" This was the part I'd been dreading. I had a relationship with another man, but it was because my husband had become distant and cold. I felt neglected, unappreciated. I was just trying to find some happiness. I saw Edric's lawyer make a note, and my stomach clenched. "Mrs. Vale," she said when it was her turn to question me, "you say you felt neglected. Can you provide specific examples of this neglect?" I fumbled for concrete instances. He was always working, grading papers, planning lessons. He never paid attention to me anymore. "I see. And during this period when you felt neglected, how many evenings per week were you home with your family?" The question caught me off guard. It varied. According to your husband's documentation, in the 3 months before he filed for divorce, you were home for dinner with your family exactly 12 times. That's once a week, Mrs. Vale. Can you explain how you felt neglected by a husband you rarely saw? My face burned. I was trying to improve myself, getting fit, making new friends. "Making new friends," she repeated. "Is that what you call having an affair?" "Objection," my lawyer said weakly. "Sustained," the judge said, but the damage was done. The questions continued, each one more devastating than the last. Patricia Chen had done her homework, and she systematically dismantled every excuse I'd prepared. "Mrs. Vale, you claimed overtime pay for hours you were actually spending with your lover. Is that correct?" "It wasn't like that. Yes or no, Mrs. Vale? Did you claim pay for hours you were not working?" "Yes, but—" "And you brought this man to family gatherings, allowed your daughter to form an attachment to him. Is that correct?" "He was just being friendly." "Did you or did you not allow your 9-year-old daughter to call your lover Uncle Theo?" The words hung in the air like an accusation. When I looked at the judge, I saw disgust in her eyes. Then it was Edric's turn to testify, and I watched in growing horror as he calmly, methodically destroyed any chance I had of maintaining custody of my daughter. He presented evidence I hadn't even known he'd collected. Recordings of phone calls where I'd lied about my whereabouts. Receipts showing I'd used our joint credit card to pay for hotel rooms. Documentation of Nora's declining grades and increasing behavioral problems at school. "Mr. Vale," his lawyer asked, "how did your wife's affair affect your daughter?" Edric's voice remained steady, but I could see the pain in his eyes. "Nora started having nightmares. She'd ask me why Mommy didn't love us anymore, why she was always gone. Her teacher called several times about her acting out in class, being aggressive with other children." And what did you do to address these issues? I tried to maintain stability for her. I made sure she had consistent bedtimes, helped with homework, arranged for her to stay with her grandmother when the tension at home became too much. Did you ever try to discuss these concerns with your wife? I tried, but Corey was rarely available for such conversations. She was usually at the gym, or out with friends, or working late, though we now know she wasn't actually working. Each word was like a nail in my coffin. When Gina took the stand to testify about my behavior at family gatherings, about my obvious infatuation with another man in front of my own child, I wanted to disappear. She brought him to our family dinner, Gina said, her voice shaking with emotion. She let my granddaughter call this stranger uncle, while her own father sat right there. It was heartbreaking to watch. The final blow came when Nora's school counselor testified about the sessions she'd been having with my daughter. Nora has been struggling with feelings of abandonment, the counselor explained. She's expressed confusion about why her mother is never home, why there's always tension between her parents. She's drawn pictures of her family that are quite telling, often showing herself and her father together, while her mother is absent or with another figure. When the counselor produced some of these drawings, I felt my heart shatter. In crayon and marker, my 9-year-old daughter had documented the destruction of our family, showing herself reaching for a mother who was always walking away. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. "Mrs. Vale," she said, looking directly at me, "while I don't doubt that you love your daughter, love is not enough. A parent's primary responsibility is to provide stability, security, and appropriate role modeling for their child. Your actions over the past several months have demonstrated a pattern of putting your own desires ahead of your family's needs." She granted Edric primary custody, with supervised visitation for me until I could demonstrate sustained stability and appropriate priorities. I was ordered to pay child support despite my reduced income following my suspension from work. The house, our savings, everything we'd built together, it all went to Edric and Nora. As the gavel fell, I felt my entire world collapse. I looked across the courtroom at my husband, my ex-husband now, and saw not triumph in his eyes, but profound sadness. Outside the courthouse, Theo was waiting by his car. I'd called him after the hearing, desperate for comfort, for someone to tell me this wasn't my fault. "How did it go?" he asked, though my expression probably told him everything. "I lost everything," I whispered. "My daughter, my house, my life." He pulled me into his arms, but for the first time, his embrace felt hollow. "We'll get through this," he said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Will we?" I looked up at him, this man I'd thrown away my marriage for. "Are you ready for all of this? For a woman with no money, no home, and a daughter who can only visit under supervision?" The hesitation in his eyes was answer enough. 3 days later, he stopped returning my calls. A week after that, I heard through mutual friends that he'd started seeing someone new, a single woman with no complications, no baggage, no consequences following her around like ghosts. I was alone in a studio apartment I could barely afford, working part-time at a job that barely covered my expenses, allowed to see my daughter for 4 hours every Saturday under the watchful eye of a court-appointed supervisor. Edric had gotten his revenge, all right, not through anger or violence or dramatic confrontation, but through patience, documentation, and the legal system. He'd let me destroy myself, then simply presented the evidence of my destruction to a judge who'd had no choice but to protect my daughter from the chaos I'd created. As I sat in my empty apartment that night, looking at a photo of Nora that was all I had left of my old life, I finally understood what I'd lost. Not just a marriage, not just a house or financial security, but the respect of everyone who'd ever mattered to me. I'd traded a lifetime of love for a few months of excitement, and now I was paying the price. The game that had started with a simple kiss had ended with the complete destruction of everything I'd once held dear. And the most devastating part was knowing that I had no one to blame but myself.